Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly in-depth ag forecast for AgSouth and Ag Carolina, brought to you by Nutrient Ag Solutions. As we think through where this is going to be going over the next several weeks, my mind is just set on trying to assess and understand if we have any risk of developing and just maintaining a big southeastern ridge. Right? We've talked about that for weeks now, and that's going to continue to be front of mind for me until we get all the way through the season. I'll be honest with you. So the map I've been talking over here is the last 14 days of precipitation as a percent of normal. Now, this does not include data from Thursday. This has always got a one-day lag on it, so just to be clear. We knew that we would have some drier pockets, right, over the last week. We knew that would be coming through, but there was some locally heavy rain that did tuck its way into parts of South Carolina and pockets of North Carolina. But overall, it's been a relatively drier signal for us. Now, there's been a really large surge of moisture that's come into the southern part of Florida, but look at how quick the cutoff is right there. Farther north you get, the drier it's been. And there's some spots of southern Georgia that haven't picked up any rainfall. There's been parts of coastal North and South Carolina that's not picked up, and as you get right into this part of North Carolina, very dry. So all of this was achieved without a big ridge, right? We've not seen that. It's all been about the Pacific Ocean. And here's what we're going to do today. I want to walk through what is now a bit of a change in the pattern. There is a ridge that's developing in this area. We want to ask how long it's going to last. A week ago, we had some hints at it, but be honest with you, it wasn't a strong signal a week ago. It was something we saw develop in last weekend's model runs over the beginning of this week. So we're going to see what is there to sustain that, if it's sustainable. I then want to branch this out and talk about some longer range content, including an update on the hurricane season, and I'll finish it up with some global updates. So we begin here. Now, just take note of a couple of things. We did get some pretty nasty storms that rolled through the Midwest last night, but there's a big area in the Midwest that's seeing some drier conditions right now, too. So for you corn and soybean growers, just take note of a drier pocket that's into this area as well. Okay, here we are. This is what this morning's satellite data looks like. The sun is up across the country. We're approaching the solstice, so it's pretty hard for me to beat the sunrise to get a video out in the morning anymore because of how long the days are. But the tropical system that was over Florida, which did miss us, it stayed out to open ocean. Dumped all that rain. It's still staying out there. And there's a lingering frontal boundary right into this area that yesterday kind of lit off a bunch of storms. See this? And they hit a big section of the Midwest. I went out early this morning. I kind of scouted some fields because these storms came through this area. And we do have a lot of corn that's laying down. I don't think there was any green snap out of this, at least widespread, but some really nasty storms in this area. By the way, a lot of the haze that you see in the atmosphere, this is all wildfire smoke from Mexico. I mean, lingering problems with Mexico, but we're going to have to come back to that in just a few moments. When we look at the last 72 hours of total accumulated precipitation, though, it was a drier finish to the week for us. So through about 9 o'clock this morning, we can tell that most of AgSouth, Ag Carolina territory was drier. Storms were in the parts of the Midwest, upper Midwest, and also in Texas, and of course the just tremendous flooding from that surge of tropical moisture coming out of eventually through the Gulf of Mexico, but coming from the Caribbean. Now, as we think about this, I'll be honest with you, the top things, I just mentioned it, big ridges, are we going to see any? That's one. Two, how much more are we going to be able to unlock the Gulf of Mexico? Because we've put severe storms on repeat on that unlocked moisture. In fact, these were pretty nasty the other day. I mentioned it, but just want to show you, those are the storm reports. We still have 4 more days, Friday through Monday, where the Storm Prediction Center is monitoring for the risk of severe storms, but it's not over us. It's not over us. It's mainly going to be surrounding us. But putting it more into context, I just want to take note that the lack of recent rainfall has started to deplete some of our top soil moisture. So looking down to about 16 inches or 40 centimeters, we do have several locations, Virginia, North, South Carolina, down into southern Georgia and this part of Florida, that are now in that 30 percentile. So this is a percentile, meaning we're comparing this to historical past. I believe the data go back to 1980. So there's a chance it goes back farther than that. I'll have to go look up the product again. But it's the idea here is you're looking almost like a rank, right? So we're in this bottom third of years lately with the way our soil moisture is shaped up. And as a result of that, we've actually seen that a couple of areas have come back on the drought monitor. So as I take note, I just see a few areas showing up in the abnormally dry here. 1, 2, 3. And then you can also take note that there is an area up in Virginia toward the mid-Atlantic that showed up as well. Our biggest drought seems to be anchored in the northwest, getting into western Canada, and then in the southwest, clipping parts of the Cotton Belt, getting down into Mexico, and then here in parts of Kansas. So this is important to understand. Drought change just in the last week. I just want to point out that these are the areas that have started to see some degradation in drought. Although in the new drought monitor, there was a 1-class improvement in parts of South Carolina where there was some heavy rain. Now you're probably going, wait, you've been showing me how dry it's been in Florida, and yet they didn't get a major improvement on the drought monitor with a foot of rain. Well, remember, these maps are made on Tuesday. And a lot of that rain came Tuesday into Wednesday and Thursday of this week. And so that's why it isn't reflected yet on the drought monitor. Keeping in line here with this idea. So I know they're released to us on the Thursday, but the data are through Tuesday of that week. But keeping in line with all of this, we're just going to take a look at some bigger picture things. And this is what I'm really thinking hard about. I'm showing you a map of specific humidity. That is not relative humidity, which is relative to temperature, but also relative to the amount of moisture. But this is specifically about how much moisture is in the atmosphere. That's it. So it is a measure of the total water content. And what I'm seeing here as I look at this is where those drought regions sit, okay, compared to where we've had just access to moisture, is really beginning to stand out on these maps. Because as you see these higher values here, it's important to note that the atmosphere's had no trouble sending through the Caribbean, coming up and curling this around. And that's ultimately why we're not on the drought monitor in extensive areas. Yeah, we've had a drier stretch in the last couple of weeks in places. But overall, we've avoided systematic long-term drought because what we've not seen are big southeast ridges. All right, that's the story. We know that one is coming in, but what it's going to do is it's going to be changing this pattern. And here's my big question for us. There's a large ridge of high pressure here that's been there since, well before mid-May, but I just took this map back to mid-May. There's another one here, and there's another one there. The Bermuda High is split. It's moved north, part of it there, part of it here, but it's not sitting here over Bermuda. So what has the flow done in response? It's really just cranked in through this area and turned around the base of that trough. And with no major southeast ridge, we've avoided going over completely dry for the last several weeks. But this is where things are about to change. This is a neat map. I just made it this morning. What it's showing you is from now through the next 15 days, what the average height anomaly is going to be. In other words, where are the ridges and where are the troughs. And what's interesting about this is the size of this ridge that's coming in. The trough displaced the ridge here a bit. The flow goes way up into Canada, and this large area of high pressure builds in. And that's going to give us a drier signal. You'll see that in a few moments. But our question is always the same. Is this around for the long haul, or is it a temporary thing? And I think the answer to that question is in the momentum of the flow coming through the Pacific Ocean. That's where I'm assessing this. So if you want to know what I'm talking about, take a look. Here's the upper level jet stream level winds. We expect in June for these winds to move toward the Canadian border. That's what leaves us in the southeast with just daily chances of thunderstorms and the heat and humidity. What ruins us is if a big ridge builds into this area. So as I play this forward, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, you can see where the flow is. You can see the larger ridge over us now. But I just want to know, is it there permanently? 18th, 19th, 20th? Yeah, it's big. But once I get out here a bit beyond that, all right, like the 20th, 21st, the solstice, I don't see it sticking around. The models are really kind of giving us a hint that we're going to squash it down, maybe move it back over parts of the South Central Plains, and even by the 26th, swiping a trough through here. So you see, that to me says pattern's not stuck. It's not permanently getting configured in the way that I just showed you here. So we do have a change, but it's not as though I think we've gone over to something entirely different. So what does that mean? Well, the next 7 days, the surges of moisture are going to be coming here out of the Gulf of Mexico and the Bay of Campeche, hitting Texas and Mexico. The jet stream's doing this. So all the severe weather, strong, chances for heavy rains are here. Now under that ridge, we're going to go over drier. Drier, not dry, drier. Will there be storms that pop? You bet. It's summertime. That's what we get. But how long does it last? Well, this is just looking over the next 7 days. What about week 2? And already into week 2, we see the models backing away from the dryness as the ridge begins to reposition. One thing is for certain, though, the flow is staying north. And that's common. That's where the jet stream typically goes this time of year. But I'll make another case for this when we get out there in the long range in a few minutes as to where I think this might go kind of more permanently into summer. Now, with that large ridge building in, we're going to get a lot of heat that's going to come into this area. And it's been a while since we've seen excessive heat lasting for several days in the Great Lakes, Eastern Corn Belt, Northeast, and even down into our region. So we're going to pack some heat into this system. It's not there yet. Early this morning, we just have a couple of areas of patchy fog, forgive me there, I almost said frost, but fog. Still have the flood watches out down for southern Florida. But just to give you an indication as to where this pattern is changing, look up here. That's a winter storm watch for early next week. We're going to watch a deep trough dig into the northwest and maybe bring some snow to very high elevation in the Rocky Mountains. But as it stands, we're out of the risk of severe storms today. It's going to be here in the plains and in the northeast. We then get into the day tomorrow. General risk of storms, that's all, down here into Georgia, South Carolina, part of North Carolina. I'll show you that in a few moments. And then as we work our way into day 3, which would be the 16th, Father's Day, storms possible, but this is just storms building on the heat of the day. And then as we get out there to like Monday, it's still going to stay in the upper Midwest. That's where I think things are going to really light up. So we said, well, what's going on with the tropics? Well, we look down there and we see one system exiting. This one this morning has been upgraded to a 50% chance of developing into a tropical system. But the guiding winds in this area are not taking it into the southeast. It's primarily getting pushed. You say, why? Well, the ridge is going to live here. So how does that flow come on the bottom side of the ridge? This is just the general flow pattern. It's going to push it this direction. That's kind of the big picture idea. So what do we have in the near term? I'm just going to show you the high-res NAM. Understand that this model is not perfect, but it's one of our models that allows convection or storm, so we look at it. So playing from this morning on Friday through the middle of the afternoon and evening, isolated storms, like I said, that's always a chance, isolated storms out of this. As we go forward into Saturday morning, midday, afternoon, again, right here, we're going to watch for the risk of some stronger storms. Just storms popping on the heat of the day. There's a very weak frontal boundary, and that could deliver some rain into AgSouth, Ag Carolina territory. That lasts in the overnight hours on Saturday, and we get into Sunday. Maybe some rain along the Appalachian Mountains, but you notice over the next 3 days, getting us through afternoon on Sunday, no major systems rolling through to deliver widespread rain. So a lot of isolated thunderstorm events, scattered in nature, not huge clusters hitting like broad, like multi-county areas. Does that make sense? That's what I'm seeing in the models. Beyond that, this is what the next 7 days looks like from the European Artificial Intelligence. It's keeping the Canadian prairie wet, the upper Midwest and Western Corn Belt wet, and it's got the most unique view of where the moisture from this tropical system that you just saw from the National Hurricane Center is expected to go. Because if you compare that to the national blend of models, it doesn't have the same result. Now you look across AgSouth, Ag Carolina territory, and we see overall drier, not dry, but drier conditions. You're going, wait, I see a lot of white. I understand. This model, though, doesn't pick up on those isolated storm events. It just doesn't. There will be storms in here, just not widespread heavy rain coverage like you're going to get in the upper Midwest or into Texas and Mexico with the surge of tropical moisture or the Canadian prairie. WPC says the same thing. Maybe the best chances would be along the Appalachian Mountains of getting decent rains. And this is what the European model says. Finally, the GFS. So we put all that together and just kind of think this through, and I'm going to show you some model differences. The GFS is the wettest for your area, although the differences are small. But there's major differences between the GFS and the European for other regions. Like the European's so wet in the upper Midwest, whereas the GFS is wetter farther into the Western Corn Belt. GFS is very wet into Texas, taking that tropical moisture and just surging it into this area. Europeans like, nope, tuck this into Mexico. So I just want to point out some differences around the country. All right, let's go ahead and compare the models so we can just see what they're up to. And we're going to start off here with the GFS left, European right. And just playing this through Friday into Saturday, we just don't see any major organized systems. We have chances for storms, daily chances for storms in the heat of the day. But as the high builds in here, we could get some flow and some isolated storms into early next week. I wouldn't doubt it if we saw that. But again, it's isolated, scattered storm events. And this is through next Wednesday and Thursday. And all the action's away from us. It's either in the upper Midwest or it's with the flow that comes out of the Bay of Campeche into Texas. See how both models are kind of lighting that up. But just don't see major chances of rain. Now, when this ridge fully builds in mid to late week next week, the southern side of it will get flow coming off the Atlantic, and there will be storms that will pop. Are the models resolving it? No, they're not. But there will be storms that pop on that heat. But then we see as we get out there to the 22nd, 23rd, as that ridge begins to move a bit, flatten, we're going to open up the Gulf and the Atlantic to more moisture transport, delivering some better chances of rain at that point. But overall, if you say, well, who's the wettest out of this? Here's the chance over the next 10 days of getting more than an inch of precipitation. If you say, well, how about the drier side of it? This is where we have the highest chances of staying under a ½ inch. And it's just a reminder that with storms that pop, which these models are not resolving, you could locally get some heavy rain briefly. But overall, it's got a drier pattern under that larger ridge for us. All right, what about beyond that? Going out there to day 10. Okay, full retreat of the jet stream north, but no big ridge remaining in the pattern. So once we get out there to that last week of June, if we just kind of take the models at face value, what they've got given to us here, I think we get a bit of a break. And that's why some of the longer range outlooks for week 2, really like the CPC's look, return a lot of storms. And this is largely due to the fact that we've had just plenty of access to Gulf moisture for a while. Notice the European ensemble goes back to near average. And we know that the GFS has a dry bias, so I'm not going to overly weight the GFS against the other two models. But I still don't see the main risk factor becoming established for a long time. You got a ridge coming. We know it's going to be there, probably to the end of the third week of June. But does it last? Does it just stick around? I don't think so. One thing it will be changing, though, is the fact that the Northeast has not had an excessive heat warning, in some places to nearly 1,800 days. We're going to break that with some of the heat that's coming in. So where do we stand on temps? Today on Friday, a low to mid 90s. As we work our way into Saturday, again, we'll hit the 90s here, upper 90s as we get down into parts of Georgia. Going into Sunday and Monday, still above average on temperatures, but the heat really pours in early next week into the Northeast. Why do we see temperatures that are maybe closer to average during this time period with that big ridge? Well, the ridge lives here. We're going to get some flow off the Atlantic. And it's going to produce some isolated storm events, but that's why we're staying away from the excessive heat into early next week. That's Wednesday and Thursday of next week. So beyond that, we're going to get some heat into a big section of the U.S. crop. In fact, in the Midwest, just so you understand what's going on with corn and soybeans, pouring on the heat in this area, drier conditions, the crops in the vegetative stage is going to jump out of the ground right in through here, making it very susceptible to wind damage should storms roll through this area. But that's your 7-day forecast of accumulated GDDs. Bigger picture, though, the 21st through the 27th, you can see that the models are hinting at the risk, a slight risk of excessive heat in this area. So I want to be just aware of that risk, knowing that the greater heat's going to be in the Ohio Valley, Mississippi Valley. So we look out there day 5 through 10, and that ridge living in this area has got the heat. So remember, the flow comes around it. We've got jet stream doing this. We're a little bit cooler here. That's day 5 through 10. This is day 10 through 15. So we're still warmer than average. Does the European model agree with it? On the whole, there is some agreement. This is day 5 through 10, and this is sliding out there to day 10 through 15. I'd say right now that the European is a warmer model when compared to the GFS. And what I do see is, you see this coolness happening here? This is another indication that the jet wants to do that. And that leaves us in a position where we end up having very weak, almost non-existent frontal boundaries and daily chances for storms because we've not shut down the Gulf of Mexico. You say, well, why not? The Gulf is not shut down primarily because there is just a lot of heat in the Atlantic right now. And that's just supplying the lower atmosphere with plenty of moisture through evaporative processes. And even though a ridge is building into this area and it's going to live there for the next 10 days, it doesn't seem like it sticks around. Why not? This is why not. Do you see that boundary between the cooler water in the Gulf of Alaska, and the warmer water of the south? That's through thermal wind relationship, keeping the winds fast here. And it's going to get them racing across this region. If we can keep momentum up, we tend to not build big ridges in places and leave them and just leave them there permanently. But at the same time, we've seen these waters warm up a bit. La Niña is sputtering, but the Atlantic is cranked. There's a very positive Atlantic meridional mode right now, and that's another indication why I think we keep on a good spot with our moisture. All right, what about after this? Well, what's going to happen with La Niña longer term? The CPC just gave us an update. They're about 85% chance by the time we get into fall of having La Niña. That's going to be important for the hurricane season, but we're going to spend most of summer INSO neutral, and that is why we're focusing more on what's happening here. So given all of that, let's step it back and just think about the near term. Watch the height pattern. So this is through the beginning of the third week of June, right? That's up to the solstice. But as we play it out there, the models leave that around and then really shift it once we get to the end of the month. Notice it flattened out here. I see more ridging in this area. I see the jet stream doing a typical summer type pattern, which looks something like that. The warmer colors just maybe means it's a bit farther to the north than otherwise. What do you not see? I don't see this thing living here. And I don't see split flow in the west. You're like, what's split flow? Well, that's where the jet stream comes up over the top like this and around the bottom like that. I don't see that at all. It seems to be open and moving. So as a result, we end up getting like a 30-day outlook on precip. Let's take it all the way out there to mid-July. Yeah, the models are just not going dry. Now, that doesn't mean we won't have something like we had the last couple of weeks where pockets are missed by thunderstorms. But there seems to be just a lot of moisture in the Gulf. And where's it going? Some of it's going into Mexico, some of it's coming along the Gulf Coast, and some of it gets pulled into our area. And without seeing the model suggest big southeast ridge, I don't have a reason to kind of say that this is wrong. What I do think, though, is that we move into a hotter summer. I mean, if you just watch this, let me take you back. This is now playing to the end of the month, getting into July. There's a lot of evidence for just heat in the system. I would like to give you another perspective, at least on week 3, week 4. So this would be June 28th to July the 4th. This would be July the 5th to July 11th. We see maybe a little bit of drier signal in the mid-Atlantic from the CFSV2, but it's not there permanently. I don't typically rely on this model, but I wanted to point out that still no significant major stresses that I can see here. I just know it's going to get warm. You know that. And I don't think the ridge lasts. So we know what to expect in the next 10 days. We see out there longer term, maybe not bringing in the major risk factors that we have to care about. Now, listen, if that changes, I tell you about it. But that's what I've got right now. What I also want to show you is the newest update that just was released from the Colorado State University. This is their hurricane activity forecast. They didn't change it. All the values are still basically the same. But I was reading over here on the side, Phil, this is the guy that makes this at CSU, his analog years. So in a tweet he put out on June 11th when they updated this, he went after 1998, 05, 10, and 20. Now, why didn't I include 26 and 1878? Because what I'm about to show you, I don't have the data going back that far. So if you just take 98, 05, 10, and 20 and stitch them all together, we were hotter July to September. On average, a couple of degrees warmer than normal. And that's significant. That's not, there's a reason why the color bar looks this way. But in terms of precip, it tended to give us greater risk of being drier in the Northeast, not necessarily in Ag Carolina or AgSouth territory. One of these years, 2020, big ridge setup here. A lot of storm activity over the top of it. And that seems to be a year that I still can't seem to shake. But I would like to show you the new European long range. July through September, it doesn't have the risk of going over dry. In fact, it's got what will likely be an active start to the hurricane season. Unfettered access to tropical moisture. Is that echoed by the NMME? This is their probability of being above normal or below normal. And you can continue to see they've got the southeast with risk of being wetter than average, with the dryness being back in the west. That seems to be a consistent theme, and that's the idea that I'm trying to share with you today. To finish this all up, I want to give you a quick international view because we have a lot of heat across much of the world right now. It's been a very hot May into June. A lot of the heat's going into the Russian grain belt here, into the west. Much of Central Europe is hot. We had some really significant heat in China earlier this week. It's backed off a bit, but the Ganges River Valley's very hot as well. So is much of South America. Last map for the day. Keeping an eye on the Russian grain belt because it looks like to be wetter to the north, but where we've really struggled with drought issues is down here, just to the east of Ukraine, which is expected to be more stormy. And just so we're clear here, how big of an area this is bigger than the southeastern part of the United States. That's a huge growing area. Mayu front stalls out flooding in parts of China, along and south of the Yangtze River. And with that heat coming into India's central kind of Ganges River Valley and through here, it's expected to be very dry too. Better rains in Western Australia, but they've been under drought for months. But as we go forward, to be honest, this is what you're going to watch. How many storms come off of the Sahel in late June into July? And they're going to feed on the heat and what will eventually be lower wind shear. And we're going to have to keep an eye on the tropics to see what develops. So that's what I got for you. And if any of that changes, you better believe I'll talk about it next week. But until then, you all have a great weekend, and we'll pick it up next Friday. Thanks.